Chapter 2120. Jahi's Core. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Thankfully my inner clock had developed over these last few weeks, so when I woke up, Jahi was still in a deep sleep. Untangling myself from her arms, I looked around our room. We had moved in last week, and thankfully we managed to change the color palette from pure, blinding white to a dull gray. Moving over to the dresser, I removed both my clothes and Jahi's, before making my way into the bathroom. Looking around, it truly was a copy of the Marquis room, as almost every stone was placed exactly in the same place. Whoever created these rooms really took the whole, make the rooms identical, to a whole other level. Approaching the bath, I activated the water and fire crystals, allowing the water to heat up. Exiting the bathroom, I approached the bed, smiling when I saw Jahi frowning slightly in her sleep. She was reaching around the bed, searching for what was missing. I continued to watch her search before gently shaking her shoulders. She groaned, before slightly opening her eyes. "Good morning, Jahi. It's time to get up." Grumbling again, she turned around, burying herself into the sheets. Sighing, I grabbed the sheets before dragging them off of her. She growled slightly, flipping over to glare at me. Seeing her glaring, I smiled, staring at her. For a few moments she laid there, before finally sitting up. Grabbing me, she pulled me onto the bed next to her, wrapping her arms around me. Leaning into her, I let her hold me, as this was the easiest way to wake her up that I had found. I had tried simply dragging her out of bed, but she was much stronger than me. I had also tried simply waking her up before moving into the bath, but she had refused to move. We were late to classes that day. Jahi stood up, dragging me towards the bath. Helping her out of her nightwear, I watched as she entered the bath. Quickly folding her clothes, I undressed as well, placing my clothes next to hers. Entering the bath, she was sitting on the stool in front of the shower, yawning slightly. Kneeling next to her, I started gently washing her. After rinsing her off, we switched spots, allowing me to enjoy her gentle caress. Moving to the bath, we sat next to one another. Sighing, I looked up at her. "Are you nervous? You awaken your core today." She smirked down at me, ruffling my ears. "Nope. Why would I be nervous? Any magic is fine, and I know I will awaken a core today. You've seen my mom effortlessly use her fire magic, and you were there when mother used her lightning magic. Besides, even if I am atrocious at magic, as long as I can learn basic spells I still have the ridiculous strength all demons are born with. So it's fine, cat, really. Relax." Saying so, she wrapped her arm around my shoulder, gently leaning her head onto mine. We sat there for a few more minutes, before I rose from her embrace. Moving back towards the door, I grabbed a towel. Looking back, I could see Jahi staring at me, her eyes wandering. I quickly made my way back to her, dragging her out of the bath. Drying her off, she continued to smirk at me, making me blush slightly. Pushing her out the door, I quickly dried myself off before moving outside. Jahi stood next to the bed, tapping her foot while her arms were crossed. After that whole little speech claiming she wasn't nervous, yet here she was, displaying a tic that I had only seen once before, when the Countess had almost demanded we have separate rooms. Jahi had begged and pleaded with the Countess, and the whole time we were together during the Countess' deliberations she had looked just like this. Smiling, I took her clothes and dressed her, before dressing myself. Making sure that everything was on correctly, I stepped back, nodding. "All set. Are you ready, Jahi?" She nodded, before grabbing my hand and leading me out the door. The awakening ceremony would take place in the same hall we practiced dance in. Making our way there, Jahi would periodically squeeze my hand, making me squeeze hers back. When we reached the door, Jahi took a deep breath before entering. Inside, a large ritual circle was chalked onto the floor, with the Marquis, Countess, and Archmage Kolia forming a triangle. In the center of the circle was a small mat and little crystal ball. Taking another breath, Jahi walked to the center before sitting cross-legged. I moved off to the side, standing next to my mother and Baroness Estra. Baron Jilk was standing opposite us. Looking up at my mother, I saw that she was slightly worried. Does awakening a core hurt? She looked down at me, smiling. No, it doesn't. It feels like you just drank something warm after being cold all day. Lady Jahi will be fine. The Baroness nodded her head. When I awakened my core, it was like being submerged in a bath. Sadly, my mana capacity is quite low. Looking between the two, I took a deep breath before turning back to Jahi. Seeing her grab the crystal and close her eyes, I continued to observe her. Moments passed, and the trio started muttering, activating rune after rune on the circle. Gradually the circle started glowing white, and the crystal ball in Jahi's hands started to shine. My breath caught in my throat when I heard her breathing heavily, and I had to hold myself back from jumping into the circle to comfort her. Time kept passing, and the glow of the circle and ball kept increasing. The trio had backed away, watching with bated breath. The brilliant white light slowly started turning a wonderful gold, a more vibrant color than the Countess Lightning, which was always tinged in a cerulean blue. Seeing this, all of us gasped in surprise. As I had started devouring books about magic, as well as talking to Archmage Kolia, I knew what colors were what when seen in a crystal. Obviously, fire was red, wind green, water deep blue, and earth brown. Lightning was yellow, metal was silver, nature a dark green, and ice was a pale blue. Light was gold, and darkness was purple. Space and time weren't recorded, but it was theorized that space would be rainbow, while time was a pale green. Staring into the crystal, the brilliant gold was almost blinding. Looking towards the Marquis and Countess, both of them had their mouths wide open in shock. Archmage Kolia had a giant grin on her face. Slowly the light started dimming. When it had disappeared, all the chalk on the floor had been erased, and the ball had cracks all over it. As Jahi continued to sit there, silence descended in the hall. All of us held our breath. Her eyes fluttered open, a brilliant gold. Blinking a few times, her amethyst eyes returned, and she took a look around the room. When her eyes met mine, I shivered, as they flickered between amethyst and gold. Getting up, she walked towards me, ignoring the others. Stopping in front of me, she tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes. Meeting her gaze, I flinched slightly at the intensity. It felt like a predator looking at prey. A wide smile spread on her face, and she pulled me into a tight hug. For a few moments I stood still, shocked. Looking over her shoulder at the Marquis and Countess, I saw both of them had a similar grin. Returning the hug, she clenched me tighter. Archmage Kolia walked forward, sighing slightly. Cat, just as a reminder, but mana amplifies a person's emotions, and in your case. Well, being bound to someone already amplifies them, so good luck. The Marquis laughed, wrapping both of us in a hug. Yeah, whatever. You have someone who loves you quite a bit. What really matters is that Jahi awakened to light magic. The only other person who can use it is the Empress' first wife, Joanna Darkon. Jahi kept nuzzling into me, and I started stroking her hair. Looking around, my mother was looking at me with slight pity, while everyone else was focused on Jahi. The fact that she has such rare magic. I smiled, knowing that in a year's time these people would yet again receive a huge shock. Chapter 22-21. Light Magic. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After Jahi had awakened her core, we had the next few days off, the reason being that the Marquis and Countess wanted her to get used to her new strength and learn to control her magic. Currently, Jahi stood in the center of a training field, wearing a crop top and loose pants. Standing opposite her was the Marquis, wearing something similar. Jahi charged forward, swinging her fist towards the Marquis. Yawning slightly, she grabbed Jahi's fist, before pushing her off slightly. Growling, Jahi charged again, and again. Sighing, I took a seat, pulling out an empty book. Grabbing a pen, I started creating sequences, labeling them and creating the combination rune. The rune for light was a rising sun, which looked like the top half of a circle with 4 lines branching off the edges. Sighing again, I pursed my lips as I went through sequence after sequence. Light magic was capable of both support and offense, as it was a potent healing magic as well as extremely destructive. Knowing this, I started to smile, creating sequences for self-healing as well as a normal healing spell. After that, I started on a more complicated sequence. A blade made from light. It sounds simple, but in order for something like that to work, you need to be able to condense light mana, hold it, and keep it solid for a long period of time. The shape rune could start simple. After all, a blade is, technically, a long, thin rectangle. Adding the point is simple, since you would just manipulate the mana into a point at the end of the blade. However, where it gets complicated is with the support runes. Length, width, power, density, speed. These are just a few of the runes you need to consider, and you also need to determine which runes take priority. Tapping the pen against my cheek, I pursed my lips, thinking. Looking at Jahi continuing to charge forwards at the Marquis, I started creating a sequence for a wide, dense blade. After all, creating the first sequence is the hardest part. After I have something that works, I can tweak it to create a completely new thing. Take a ball, for example. A normal elemental sphere, one of the most basic spells, can be turned into something crazy. Add runes for quantity, density, and power, and suddenly that harmless sphere becomes a barrage of your element. Conversely, adding the runes for speed, small size, and power could create a bullet-like spell. Grinning, I continued the sequence, creating 3 different variations that should, in theory, create my desired result of a large blade. Hearing someone walk behind me, I looked over and saw the Countess looking at the pages, nodding. The second one is the most likely to succeed. See, the way the length and width runes interact means that, if they are the base of the spell, they need to take priority. The remaining mana can be used for the other runes, like power or density. Look. Saying so, she started tracing the runes in the air, starting with the symbol for lightning, using an up triangle for fire and 4 horizontal lines for wind. After that, she drew the rectangle, followed by the runes for increased width, density, and power. Finishing the sequence, a wide blade of solidified lightning appeared in her hand. She held it for a few seconds before letting it fizzle out of existence. Quickly copying down the sequence she used, I looked back at her, asking, what would the combination rune look like? Sighing, she slowly drew it in the air. Quickly copying it down, I grinned before standing up. Walking over to her, I gave her a small hug. Hearing her chuckle, I was quickly pulled into her arms, making me tilt my head. She continued to chuckle, before walking onto the field. Looking over, I saw that Jahi was panting, sweating profusely, whereas the Marquis stood, looking like she had just walked onto the field. Turning towards us, the Marquis smiled before walking over. Ha! If only Jahi had your brains, kid. She just charges in without a single care in the world. Scoffing, the Countess glared at the Marquis. So she takes after you. If I remember correctly, the reason I used to win our spars was because you would charge straight into any traps or spells I tossed your way. Well, I learned, didn't I? Besides, I know you made those spells stronger just to make our nights more intense. Anyways, Kat here already created quite a few spells for you to try, Jahi. Taking the book from my hand, she tossed it to Jahi, who caught it. Although she was glaring at the Countess, she opened the book and read the first sequence, which was the most simple spell, a ball of light magic. Tracing the runes in the air, they flickered briefly before disappearing. Frowning, Jahi tried once more, this time presumably using less mana. The runes flashed, before a small ball of light, the size of a baseball, appeared before her. She grabbed it, snuffing the light. Tracing the runes again, she created a larger ball, which produced more light. Smiling, I looked between the Marquis and Countess. Both looked slightly impressed, but considering that they could use much more advanced magics, I took that to mean that Jahi did pretty well. Wiggling out of the Countess' arms, I ran towards Jahi, laughing. "You can do magic, Jahi. Try the next one, try the next one." She gave me a small smile before looking back at the page. Repeating the previous sequence, this time she added a rune at the end, one to make the sphere larger. Again, it took her a few tries to get the mana right, but eventually she did, creating a sphere 2 times larger than the previous one. Laughing again, I looked at Jahi with wide eyes. "Magic. It's really magic." Giggling, I pointed to the next spell, asking her to continue. Seeing her slowly go through each spell, getting a feel for her mana, I was elated. Seeing the things that I dreamt of in my previous life made me giddy, and knowing that I had only a year before I could do this as well was both amazing and annoying. Eventually, Jahi closed the book, handing it back to me. Pouting slightly, I took it. Looking at her, she had a warm look in her eyes, before she ruffled my ears. "I'll do all the magic you want tonight. Right now, however, I need to spar with Mom." I nodded, moving back towards my seat. Both the Marquis and Countess chuckled, before moving back to their spots. Opening the book, I slowly thought of everything I could, going from area of effect attacks to single target attacks. For some reason, I really enjoyed creating these sequences, and with the help of the Countess, I managed to, hopefully, make them viable for Jahi to try eventually. Slowly filling the book with spells, I looked up. Jahi was now taking the time to think of different strategies, moving in different ways to try and land a hit on the Marquis. Apparently, they had made a bet, with the condition being hitting the Marquis somewhere other than her arms or legs. Seeing Jahi dash around, launching herself up high or down low, was captivating. After all, she was currently moving as fast as some professional athletes in my last life. Considering the Marquis looked unimpressed and bored, I was both excited and afraid to see what the combat at higher levels looked like. However, thinking that far, I wondered if I would even do anything if I reached that level. After all, while I might say I am fine with death or killing in order to protect those dear to me, actually seeing it, or doing it, well, that's a different story. Pursing my lips, I continued to think about our future. From the various books and real classes from Baron Jilk, I could gather that the world is at a relative peace. Our neighbors have little to no enmity towards us, and the Empire has no desire to acquire more lands. So on the foreign front, the only true threat are the monsters from the Labyrinthian. Internally, a few houses and clans have displayed disdain for House Asmodia. However, considering the books I have read, both the Marquis and Countess hold positions of such power and prestige that these people need to be careful. The Countess is a trusted advisor for the Empress, while the Marquis is one of 4 people who were granted the honor of becoming the Empress Knights of Cinder, a small group of highly talented and trusted warriors. So, while there may be small issues to deal with, like petty nobility in the rare monster attacks, hopefully our lives should be peaceful. Who am I kidding? Whenever anyone is thrown to a new world, nothing is ever peaceful. Chapter 23-22. Promise you are listening at novelfull.audio. Focusing on the Marquis and Jahi again, I was astounded to see Jahi slowly making the Marquis react. Previously, the Marquis would barely move at all, simply shifting parts of her body into Jahi's blows. Now, however, she had to move her arms and legs, using her forearms and shins to block jabs and kicks. Jahi wasn't speeding up, nor was she getting stronger, but she was instead weaving different moves together, using her entire body to its fullest. Watching her slowly combine more movements together, I was entranced, watching what looked like a very beautiful dance. Dashing forward, Jahi swung her right fist forward, colliding with the Marquis' forearm. Instead of retracting her hand, Jahi wrapped her arm around the Marquis before using it to pull herself up, launching her feet towards the Marquis' midriff. Sadly, The height difference proved to be too great, as the Marquise just extended her arm, causing Jahi to kick the air. Shaking her arm slightly, Jahi fell to the ground, quickly scrambling to her feet. I continued to watch the two demons spar, marveling at the grace and control behind their movements. I brought out a new book, deciding to start preparing spells for next year. As much as I wanted to jump straight to ice, I had to start with the two elements that created ice, wind and water. I started with water, deciding to dedicate the first part of my book to the water element. Starting with the element rune, which was a down-facing triangle, the inverse of the fire rune, I started with spells that came to mind first when I thought of water magic, support magic. I created various spells, ranging from an internal healing spell to an area healing spell. Pursing my lips, I slowly went through each possible variation, narrowing my sequences down to a few. Satisfied with what I had, I turned my attention to creating a spell that would create a layer of mana over my body that would act as either a shield or a repellent. This stumped me slightly, as I had to create a spell that not only created a stable layer of mana around myself, but would also repel attacks, either physical or magical in nature. Tapping the pen to my cheek, I sighed, realizing that I would need to create a few different spells before creating a ritual circle to allow them to work together without interference. Deciding to wait until I not only had a better understanding of ritual circles, but also of more advanced sequences, I went about creating offensive spells next. I slowly lost myself to the sequences, tuning out the world around me as I slowly filled page after page. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually a shadow fell over me, and looking up I saw Jahi looking down at me, her lips pursed slightly. Seeing her furrow her brow as she attempted to read the sequences on the page, I closed the book. Looking at her, I realized she was practically soaked with sweat. Yet, she wasn't panting, nor was there any noticeable sign that she just exercised for God knows how long. Turning to look at the Marquise, I frowned slightly when I saw her with a small sheen of sweat on her brow, looking like she had simply been out for a walk. Moving towards Jahi, I grabbed a towel before gently wiping the sweat from her body. Ignoring the slight smirk on her face, I continued wiping her off. Finishing, I was about to pull away when she wrapped me in her arms. Hesitating slightly, I sighed before leaning into her. The slight musk paired with her naturally sweet smell made for an interesting combination, and when she pulled me closer to herself, I buried my face into her neck, enjoying her warmth. Hearing the chuckles from her parents, I quickly tried to push her away, only to have her squeeze me tighter. Pouting, I reluctantly leaned back into her. However, when I felt her hands slowly lowering, I tried to leave her embrace yet again. Failing to do so, I pursed my lips before pinching the exposed skin of her waist, twisting it slightly. Yelping, she jumped back, glaring at me. Giving her a slight smile, I quickly folded the towel before turning towards the Marquise. Seeing her wide grin, I pouted again before quickly taking the towel that she had been using, folding it and placing it in the used pile near the door. Chuckling, the Marquise looked towards the indignant Jahi, saying, "Go take a bath and rest. You did good." Jahi gave a humph, before stomping over to me, grabbing my hand and dragging me towards the exit. Sighing, I tried to match her pace, struggling slightly to keep up with her longer strides. Eventually we reached our room. Dragging me towards the bath, Jahi had a smirk on her face. Blushing slightly, I realized she would get me back for that pinch earlier. However, even though I was aware of the impending punishment, I went about my duties, quickly undressing Jahi before undressing myself, placing our clothes off on the side before grabbing a clean set, laying them on the bed. Walking into the bath, I saw Jahi was already sitting in front of the shower, her chin resting in her hand. Moving to kneel behind her, I started our routine, lathering her hair with soap before gently rinsing it off, doing the same to the rest of her. Trading spots, I felt a little apprehensive about letting her out of my sight, but surprisingly she didn't do anything, simply washing me off before walking over to the bath. Sitting down, she made no move to pull me to her side like she normally did. Frowning slightly, I took a seat next to her. Still nothing. Pursing my lips, I looked at her from the corner of my eye. Jahi was leaning back, her eyes closed as she enjoyed the bath. Feeling my heart clench slightly, I frowned. Was I always this? Dependent on someone else? Simply being slightly ignored set me off this much. Gritting my teeth, I leaned into Jahi, keeping my eyes on her face. Seeing no shift in her expression, I sighed. While it wasn't ideal, as I had gotten used to the warmth she provided, both physically and emotionally, I was content with the fact that she wasn't moving away from me. Time passed by, Jahi dozing while I sat there, staring into the water. Eventually, Jahi wrapped an arm around me, making me jump slightly. Looking at her, I saw her wide grin and was tempted to pinch her again, but decided not to. Leaning into her, I felt her hold me closer. Cat, what was in that book from earlier? Oh, the brown one. Water spells. I think I want to make spells for each basic element as preparation for when I awaken my core. Chuckling, Jahi looked down at me. Oh, so you're confident you will awake a core, huh? Good. Ruffling my ears, she rested her head on my own, going quiet again. Rising, she stretched before stepping out of the bath. Following her, I dried both of us off before quickly dressing Jahi in a clean set of clothes. Quickly throwing on my own extra set of clothes, I followed her out of the room. We were heading towards the Marquis room, as we all still ate together in her main room. Entering, we could see the Marquis yawning as she finished signing another paper. Sitting on the desk next to her was the Countess, reading over different papers before placing them into separate stacks. Hearing us enter, they looked over. Jules should be back in a few minutes. Nodding, Jahi went and sat on a couch, sighing. I walked up to the Marquis, and asked, could I perhaps be excused from attending Baron Jilk's classes in the future? The Marquis raised her brow, while the Countess frowned slightly. Pray tell, why should you not attend his classes? Looking at the Countess' frown, I answered, I wish to use the 3 hours to clean and prepare our rooms. As it is, I barely have time to keep them tidy, let alone clean. Additionally, I have started to study the various books available in the library, and have asked Jahi to quiz me on history. The Countess turned to look at the Marquis, who just shrugged. Sighing, the Countess said, well, it's not me you should be asking. After all, the only reason you are attending that class is because Jahi wants you to. Turning, I could see Jahi frowning at me. Moving to stand in front of her, I looked at her. Her frown growing, she sighed, glaring at me, before leaning towards my ear. Fine, but I expect something in return for the time spent apart. Feeling her breath on my ear, paired with her words, I shivered slightly, before nodding furiously. I promise. So, a few more chapters before another time skip. I have something planned for these chapters, though I hope you enjoy. Chapter 24-23. Another day in the life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Leave comments at the end, instead of at any specific part of the chapter, as I will be approaching a question that I have wanted to ask as of recent. Thanks. That night, I made good of my promise. Having finished dinner and the last bath of the day, Jahi and I lay in bed. Except. Well, Jahi was using my lap as a pillow. Looking down at her, the pure bliss radiating from her face made me blush a bit, however I continued to stroke her hair, earning myself another soft purr. I was sitting at the top of the bed, the pillows moved to surround Jahi. Since it was currently late, both of us were ready for bed, and that was when Jahi had sprung this on me. Admittedly, my mind was in turmoil as I wondered what she wanted from me, but hearing it was just a lap pillow made me both happy and sad. Seeing her chest slowly rising and falling, I realized she was asleep. Smiling, I gently lifted her head, placing a pillow under it, before sliding next to her. Wrapping my arms around her, I could feel her shuffle her body closer to mine. Burying my nose into her hair, I lay there, enjoying the quiet of the night. Daily XP 187.5, Level 10, 863/3843. Seeing the familiar notification, I smiled, thinking about how my daily experience should go up now that I am actually able to start cleaning our rooms. Holding Jahi closer to myself, I slowly fell asleep. Our morning went the same as always, except for the fact that it was Jahi who woke me up and not the other way around. When I had lost my source of warmth, Jahi had to drag me up before hugging me from behind. It took me a few minutes, but eventually I came around, blinking the sleep from my eyes. Due to Jahi's insistence yesterday at dinner, classes resumed today. Getting ready, we eventually made our way to the music hall, where Baroness Estra waited. As always, Baroness Estra stood tall, her hands gently clasped in front of her, her posture as elegant as always. The class went about the same as always, except now Jahi was much more open about her desires. Seeing this, both the Baroness and I frowned, however for completely different reasons. Remembering what not only the system had said, but also Jahi herself and Archmage Kolia, I realized that, maybe, just maybe, she was like me, a more mature mentality placed in a younger body. According to the books Archmage Kolia had given to the both of us, I recalled the passage about the differences between those who have awoken a core versus those who haven't. While it has only been a few days since she had her core awakened, Jahi was a demon, which matured quickly anyways. However, now that she has a core, her growth will be accelerated. Pursing my lips at the thought of her getting much, much taller than me quickly made me want this year to pass quickly. After all, if she becomes like the Marquis, and reaches over 7 feet tall, even my normally tallish frame of around 6 feet will feel small next to her, let alone if she shoots up to over 5 feet soon, with me barely reaching 3.5 feet now. Not only the size would be affected by a core, as it seemed like it enhanced all the organs of a person, including the brain. While they would still lack the experience that comes with age, people with cores mature quickly in both body and mind. Of course, how they are treated and their attitudes will still be shaped by their surroundings, but considering our surroundings, well, it seems like Jahi is more likely to be a promiscuous demon. Reaching that conclusion, I realized the upcoming years would be quite difficult, in the sense that she will always be maturer than me in the physical sense, which could definitely be hard to deal with, considering I am conflicted on how to act. Remembering that I have decades of experience that she doesn't, I don't want to be the first to make a move, as she is technically younger than me in that regard. However, remembering my own youth, well, that brings the next problem. Do I accept her advances or make her wait? Both have pros and cons, namely being the fact that I am already getting mentally aroused by some things, as well as the fact that if she is like the Marquis, this could easily make her turn to someone else to help her. Of course, we have the soul bond, but that doesn't guarantee that I am always the center of her affections. Sighing, I decided that I would think more of this when I didn't have to worry about the wandering hand she sent my way. Coughing, Baroness Estra sent a strained smile to Jahi before saying, "Lady Jahi, respectfully, there is a time and place for everything, and this is not a time for what you are doing. If you continue, I will stand in for Catherine and be your dance partner. Are we clear?" At that, Jahi quickly placed her hands in the correct places, her lips pursed and a look of determination appearing on her face. Sighing, Baroness Estra sent us through the movements of each dance, alternating speeds as she went, ensuring we could follow any tempo. Like always, the end of that class had me exhausted, however Jahi seemed perfectly fine. Pouting slightly, I really wanted this year to pass, as I wanted to experience the physical increase of having a core. Before she left, Baroness Estra turned towards us, saying, "Next class we will be devoting the first half hour to determining which instrument you shall pursue. When that is determined, class shall be divided evenly between music and dance. As it is, Catherine is displaying good etiquette, while Lady Jahi does as well, though. Anyways, I shall see you both tomorrow morning." Giving a curtsy, the Baroness exited the room. Looking towards Jahi, I observed her, seeing her eye twitch slightly before she turned towards me. Approaching, she grabbed my hand before dragging me towards our room. As we had 2 hours before we separated, Jahi made everything quick, giving us an hour or so to enjoy each other's presence. Lounging on the couch, I leaned on her as she skimmed through her books, reviewing things she deemed necessary for her upcoming class with Baron Jilk. Dozing slightly due to my exhaustion, both physical and mental, I eventually felt Jahi stand up. Catching myself, I managed to keep myself from falling into the couch, knowing I would definitely welcome its embrace and fall asleep. Rubbing my eyes, I looked at Jahi, her serious gaze startling me awake. Getting up, I followed after her as made her way to the library. Stopping in front of the doors, she turned to me. "Cat. I expect tonight to be just like yesterday, got it?" Her lips were pulled into a slight frown, making me smile slightly. Seeing that, Jahi pulled me into a hug, burying her face into my neck. Feeling her breath tickling me, I blushed slightly, noticing a few servants trying, and failing, to hold back chuckles and smiles. Pulling away, Jahi was also smirking as she saw my face. Ruffling my ears, she entered the library. Turning quickly, I made my way back to our room as quickly as I could. Entering, I looked around, thanking the gods that Jahi wanted very little in our rooms besides books. Multiple shelves were scattered around the room, and the desk was littered with open books. So, question. How is this going to work? Do I get a quest for each room, or just an overall quest for the entire area? Oh, you actually want quest prompts? Yeah, no. Unless you want me to constantly tell you 4 quests. Yeah, sounds like a headache waiting to happen. Can you at least tell me what each room is worth? The bathroom was 350 XP for the whole room being cleaned, right? Correct. Here is a list of the rooms, and they will be increased slightly due to the various miscellaneous quests like clean the table or check all crystals, you know, the ones you received last time. Bathroom. 400 XP bedroom. 400 XP main room. 750 XP library. 300 XP, reminder. These are the values before the growth skill. Additionally, they are repeatable, however you cannot clean the same room multiple times, as there is a limit to how clean a room is. So, no cheesing the system by cleaning the same room multiple days in a row to farm experience. Fine, fine. Oh, could I trouble you to set an alarm for 2:45 p.m.? Sure. Sighing, I set about inspecting each room, deciding to tidy our bedroom first. Looking around, I sighed again, marveling in the fact that we managed to keep it relatively tidy, except for the bed sheets and a few piles of books scattered in front of more shelves. Grinning, I set about cleaning the room, thinking about the large amount of XP I would receive for doing something I enjoyed doing. So, first things first. While this is far, far into the future, I want to know what people think. Obviously, I am not writing between 2 minors, and Jahi will wait till much later than now. However, when should that be? I believe I have emphasized enough that 1, they are not human. In fact, they are better than humans. Of course, I have a little more I need to write to explain how much better, but still, I did write a while back that humans came from these other races, not the other way round like most fantasy novels do. 2, there is a whole new organ that quite literally speeds up the growth of the body. This was something I did without even thinking of adult things. I made mana something that is tied to the life force of the world, and as these living beings have it inside them, it accelerates growth and empowers them. This came from how body tempering works in cultivation novels, something I used to read too much of. Additionally, this is a world set in fantasy, wars happen, monsters exist, and while they are currently not a problem, these countries were shaped by them. Laws and morals are much different there than they are here, just like how laws were different half a century ago, not even mentioning half a millennia ago. So I guess what I am asking is this. What would you, the reader, feel more comfortable with? Should they wait until they literally reach our allowed ages, being either 16 or 18, or should I allow it to be this world's age of consent/adulthood? Will people be caught up in the number, or no? After all, while they are not actually of age in our world, they will have reached the physical and mental maturity of their prime much quicker than us. Additionally, they wouldn't be doing anything until they are older. If you want me to convert ages, I would be writing when they have reached the 16-ish age, which would be like when they reach 10.11. If the number is what turns you off or makes you uncomfortable, I can easily start using the converted age instead, while still doing stuff like, it's been 8 years since I came here, or, it's been 6 years since my core was awakened. Again, I am fine with waiting to write lemon scenes. However, I think it feels weird that they would wait till years after they reached adulthood to do anything. It would feel like I would be writing a character for a romance anime where it takes them over a year of dating to hold hands. Not my cup of tea, but I am also from the States, and have seen/heard people my age doing much worse at much younger ages together. So yeah, let me know. I believe I have put forward a decent reason for being able to write lemons, but I don't want to be crucified for writing fictional characters who aren't human doing things together. Other than that, I just wish to remind people that if you comment things, words that web novel censors like a.dult, h.orny, and so on should be typed like that, with a dot separating letters or changing a letter altogether. I've had a few comments be deleted from the site that I wanted to reply to but just couldn't because they contained a word like that. So, if you think it would be censored by web novel, please add a dot or change a letter so it can be seen and replied to. Anyways, I hope you continue to enjoy. Chapter 25-24. Something exciting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking around our bedroom, I took notice of what would and wouldn't need to be moved. All the loose books would need to be organized on shelves after I made sure they were clean. Additionally, I would need to make the bed and clean the other pieces of loose furniture, like the dresser and small couch and chairs that were haphazardly scattered about our room. Pursing my lips, I slowly let my mind wander, thinking about what I could fill this space with to make it feel more homey. In my previous life, I had always lived in small, compact spaces. It was all I or my family could ever afford. Even Kyoka, when I lived with her, had a smallish apartment. Sighing, I pushed the thought to the back of my mind for now. After all, I have no idea what either of us would end up liking in the future, so why bother decorating now? Though I think Jahi wouldn't particularly care either way. Grabbing the cloth that I used on my first day in this new world, a gift from the Marquis for moving into a new room, I set about cleaning the shelves before organizing the books. For those that were open, I placed a small bookmark that Jahi had an abundance of but never used. If they were my books, I wouldn't mind folding the corner. It was a habit I picked up from my mother, and I always thought it added character to my books, showing that they weren't just for show, that I really read them. However, seeing as how Jahi either left them open or placed bookmarks in them, she clearly didn't share my same sentiment, so I placed the bookmarks in them before shelving them. Finishing the first shelf, I slowly made my way down the wall, deciding to work the edges of the room first before moving towards the middle. Thankfully, the Marquis had no qualms splurging her enormous wealth, as she had the few carpets in our rooms embroidered with self-cleaning runes, meaning I didn't have to take them outside and beat the dust out of them. Slowly but surely, I finished the room. The bed proved to be a slight problem for my tiny frame, considering it was a gigantic bed and the sheets were quite heavy. Wiping the small sheen of sweat off my brow, I turned towards the various loose pieces of furniture around the room, a grin on my face as I couldn't wait to get my large sum of experience. While I was in the middle of finishing the table that was placed at the foot of the bed, I had a notification. It is currently 2:45 p.m. Will you finish the room or go greet your master? Sighing, I quickly finished the table before pursing my lips. Ha! Whatever, it's good enough. I'm gonna go wipe my face before going to the library. Understood, quest complete. Clean the bedroom. Reward. 368 XP, 460 XP, Level 10, 863/3843. 1323/3843, seeing the large amount of experience, I grinned. How long is the cooldown for the quest? 2.3 days. Or if it gets dirty without your interference. No trashing the room just to clean it up. Chuckling, I quickly entered the bathroom, turning on the sink. Pooling a little water into my hands, I splashed my face before wiping it off with washcloth. Looking at my reflection, I smiled. Seeing my wide amber eyes filled with a happy light made me think back to my previous life. I'm sure I looked like this often as a child, happy at random things all the time. I had no problems making friends, finding different things to occupy my time. Later in my life, I slowly stopped going out of my way to approach people, focusing instead on my studies. Of course, I still was a people person, but didn't feel the need to be the one to approach others. Thinking of this, I looked a bit deeper at my features, seeing just how similar I looked as a child to when I grew up. My eyes slowly started drooping, and due to my personality my thin lips were always slightly upturned, giving me a carefree look. My nose was small, while my brows had always been thin. Of course, currently I was stick thin, but that was my major change from kid to teen, my height and my body. Just thinking about having my old body back made me excited, and considering the recent thoughts I've been having, I was so happy that course accelerated physical growth. In a year's time I would start growing rapidly. My grin widening, I finished up before making my way towards the library. If I knew Jahi, she would be barely holding herself back, her eye twitching slightly as she refrained from bolting towards the door. A small smile rose to my lips at the thought, and when I reached the door I stood straight, my hands clasped in front of me. Different servants passed me by, giving nods to me before carrying on with their work. Minutes passed, and eventually the door flung open, a blue blur flashing towards me. Feeling the familiar warmth and arms of Jahi, I leaned into her embrace, gently wrapping my arms around her. She nuzzled her head into the crook of my neck, taking a deep breath. Sighing, she pulled away slightly, her dazzling amethyst eyes shining with warmth. It feels like it's been weeks since I last saw you, cat. Chuckling, I smiled up at her, saying, it's been but a few hours, Jahi. How are you going to function when you have more responsibilities, or need to attend an event where I can't accompany you? Pouting, she said, then I just won't attend, or force them to let you attend. Chuckling again, I leaned back into her. It was moments like this that made me anticipate the future. If this strong love continues. Blushing slightly, I was about to say something when a servant approached us, bowing. The Marquis and Countess have requested your presence in their chambers. Touring towards the bowing maid, Jahi nodded before grabbing my hand. Allowing her to lead me towards the Marquis' room, I was wondering what they summoned us for. As the library was close to both our rooms, the walk wasn't long, and what greeted us when we entered? Well, it was an interesting sight. My mother sat on the couch, pouting while she looked away from the Marquis. Standing next to the sitting Marquis, the Countess was smiling, her eyes flickering between her normal deep blue and the bright azure. Finally, the Marquis had an exasperated look on her face as she alternated her gaze between the two upset women. Her ruby eyes looked helpless, and she was constantly opening and closing her mouth as she thought of what to see. Seeing us enter, she sighed before gesturing for us to sit. The Countess stalked over to us, dragging me into her lap, petting my head to de-stress herself. Sensing the serious atmosphere, Jahi let this invasion of my space go, keeping her amethyst gaze locked on the Marquis. Surrendering myself to the Countess' attention, I also turned my gaze to the Marquis, wondering what could anger both the Countess and my mother to this extent. Standing up, the Marquis lifted an envelope, sighing. Well, the Empress has invited herself to our home. She has also invited the Sultana Anyubai and one of her wives and daughter. With that, my mother gave a humph and the Countess started petting me faster. The smell of ozone was also slightly disturbing. The Empress wishes for Jahi to meet more people of her age and broaden her horizons with a meeting with our neighbors. What this actually means is that 4 really important adults and 2 really important children are visiting our house. Shrugging, Jahi said, "Well, it was expected, wasn't it? I awoke like magic. You yourself said there is only one other in the empire. So why are Mother and Julie both so emotional?" Chuckling dryly, the Marquis looked between the 2 women before saying, "The woman the Empress is bringing is her newest wife, Lorelei Presa. Someone who I used to have an interest in her." Scoffing, the Countess said, "An interest? You used to flirt heavily with her while we were in the academy. If I hadn't approached you first and got you under control, you would have brought her in as your second wife, before you even did anything with your first." Flinching slightly, the Marquis pursed her lips. "Well. Fine, I give you that. But I never did anything, nor did I plan to. Also, that's all in the past, I wouldn't do anything to her now." Clicking her tongue, the Countess looked away. The ozone smell was much more prominent now. Continuing, the Marquis looked towards my mother. "The Sultana is bringing her third wife, Kyocera. Who was the rival of Julie here?" Growling slightly, my mother looked towards the Marquis. "So tell the Sultana to bring someone else. I don't want to see that." Stopping, she looked towards me before saying, "No good woman." My mind blanked slightly, wondering why my mother was trying to not curse in front of me when I witnessed her getting intimate multiple times. Surely that would be worse than cursing. Sighing again, the Marquis rubbed her temples, before continuing. "I can't, because..." Her next words made my heart clench. "The child of Lorelei and the child of Kyo are both potential partners for Jahi. Well, let's start with the things that aren't related to the thing above this. 1. I decided on how to proceed with the lemons of this story. I will gradually ease in over time, _AMVS idea, with things I won't be posting a asterisk for, things like kissing or light touching. I believe that beautiful little star is reserved for when things get heavy. But yeah, I will slowly ease into their more intimate relationship. If you aren't here or haven't seen my Naruto fanfic, that asterisk in a chapter's title means it's a lemon. Many other authors use that as well, just so you don't end up reading something embarrassing in public. 2. We hit 50k views and 200 collections. Thank you so much for that. It's so cool to know that people are actually reading and enjoying something I started on a whim. I hope you continue to enjoy the story. Finally, let's talk about that oh so little thing I mentioned at the end of this chapter. I am going to be introducing 2 characters, both of which will be different from each other. Both are here to stay, but whether they enter a relationship with Jahi and Kat will be up to you all. Honestly, the current ideas for both are quite rough, but I just have to write about them as kids, so I have time to decide exactly how they end up as adults. However, like I said, who ends up in bed with our little demon and her cute puppy will be up to you all in the end. If there is enough support for both, then both. If there is no support for them, then maybe they start changing slightly, or someone new is introduced. Or if I fall in love with one of them too much, then your opinions may not sway me. So, yeah. These 2 should be the only 2 that have a chance to join Jahi and Kat. One of them will more than likely end up with Jahi. I know some people don't want harem, but again, I don't plan on a galaxy-spanning harem, 1 or 2 more people, that's it. I call it harem light. Of course, we haven't seen these characters yet, and there is still the academy that needs to happen, not even mentioning what happens during and after that. Well, that's what's planned for the foreseeable future. The introduction of important characters and then Kat's core. Enjoy. Chapter 26-25. Discussion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, I'm guessing harem is a no word. Even though it's a tag. So, I will respond to what those comments that had been deleted asked, as well as something many others have asked as well. Will this be Jahi's harem or Kat's harem? The answer is simple, at least to me. It is, on paper, Jahi's harem. She is the next head of the Asmodia house, and is of more importance. While these two characters being introduced will be important, they marry into Jahi's family. However, as you have noticed, Jahi is in love with Kat and vice versa, so if a character ends up pissing off one or the other, it will be dealt with by both. As such, unofficially, it is both of them who have the harem, they are the nucleus of the relationship. Additionally, I understand that some dislike harem, I do as well, however I have always been fine reading about what I have called harem light, which is just adding one or two more people into the mix. It's not only manageable but also allows for those characters to be more than just a walking trophy for the MC. On top of that, whenever I create something like this, I prefer to write with realistic interactions in mind, as well as realistic everything else, in the sense that, due to Jahi's rank and her status as a light magician, she will be very important to the Empire. To the degree that she would need to be tied directly to either the Empire or someone else who is important. So, that's where the two characters come in. They are, socially, very important. Both are daughters of a country's leader. However, as I said previously, they are marrying into Jahi's family. They would take the Asmodia name. There will be no need to worry that these characters would have more power than Jahi. Also, my other reasoning for harem is quite simple. I have kinks in mind for specific characters, and it was already heavily implied what both Kat and Jahi would be like. Adding more characters allow me to change things slightly, bringing out sides in characters that you normally wouldn't see. Also, I just want more excuses to write lemons. Hopefully that answers most questions that people have regarding the harem element of this story, as well as who has what and so on. Dang, that was long, like 400 words long. Both the child of Lorelei and the child of Kyo are potential partners for Jahi. At that, I froze, while I could see Jahi also freeze. The Countess sighed, the sweet smell of ozone disappearing. So her light magic is making the Empress wish to tie her down. Looking at the Countess, the Marquis sighed as well, before nodding. Jahi stood up, growling, I will not marry another. Kat is all I need. Gritting her teeth, the Marquis looked down at her daughter, before sighing again, Jahi. Even with all those books crammed in your head, you don't get this. It isn't something you can turn down. You need to marry someone important. If you had awakened a combination magic like Rhea, we could get away with elevating Julie and Kat to barons, allowing you to take her as your wife and never worry about taking another. However, light magic is a different thing altogether. I only know two other people with magic like you. Joanna Darkon with light, and Yi one of the Tian dynasty with his dark magic. You are one of 3 people currently alive with that kind of magic. Of course the Empress is going to want to tie you down to our empire. Scoffing, Jahi tried to grab me from the Countess, but she simply lifted me to her shoulders, away from Jahi's grasp. Sighing, the Countess said, as much as I hate it, and I know you hate it, it's true. The most you can do now is hope and pray that one of these girls piques your interest. Growling again, Jahi glared at the Countess. I will not be interested in another. I was shaking slightly, but knew that this would happen eventually. When I heard that if Jahi had lesser magic, it could have been just us, I grit my teeth. However, eventually, I calmed down. I had said that this might happen, but to actually hear that it is unavoidable, especially with how vehemently Jahi is against it, makes it a hard pill to swallow. Tapping the Countess' arm, I gave her a small smile when she looked up at me. Lowering me to the ground, I quickly hugged Jahi from behind. She had turned back towards the Marquis, looking to argue some more. Feeling my embrace, she stiffened. Resting my head on her shoulder, I said, it's fine, Jahi. As long as you promise to always have me at your side, I'm fine allowing another girl to join us. After all, I can stand on your right while she stands on your left. Giving a weak smile to that, Jahi turned around and held me close. The Marquis also had a small smile, though the sad glint in her eyes shows that she wasn't entirely pleased by this turn of events either. I promise. Now and forever, I will always love you. Forever. Hearing her hoarse whisper, I stroked the back of her head slowly. Feeling her calm down, I gently moved towards the couch, sitting next to her. Looking towards the Marquis, I asked, "What are they like?" Giving me a wry smile, she shrugged. "All I know of Lorelei's kid is that she's shy, likes books, and rarely speaks. Her name is Leon Presa, Ash. As for Kyo's kid, well, if she's anything like her two parents, she should be a boisterous, energetic furball. Her name is Anputsera." Sighing, I continued to stroke Jahi's hair, hoping to keep her calm. "Are they the main two potential partners for Jahi then?" The Countess chuckled dryly, saying, "No, there would be more. You two are part of a strong generation. The Duchess up north has a daughter who will be going to the academy the same year as you. Additionally, there are the twin princesses of the Felian kingdom on the Empire's western border. Many other important people are in that list of potential partners. Hell, we might even see some envoys from the Tian dynasty in other faraway countries, hoping to bribe you to defect over to them. However, those two are the ones that have the most sway. One is the only princess of our empire your age, while the other is Begum of the Sultanate that shares our border. The people that matter know that Jahi is just like her mother, so they are sending women instead of men. Thank the gods for that. The last thing I want to deal with are those annoying pests." N. Begum is a title for important women in southern Asia, which includes parts of the Middle East. Since it's a sultanate and all, I did some, albeit brief, research and liked the sound of this compared to others, as well as that it is still used to denote a woman's single status today. Though correct me if I'm wrong. Chuckling at the last part, I fell silent, thinking. Hopefully Jahi can come to love either the princess or Begum, as these two would have the best chances of making Jahi only need to take in one or two women. The other options could easily result in Jahi being forced to take more wives just to guarantee her loyalty. Seeing my serious face, Jahi squeezed my hand, before sighing. I guess we shall see, then. If Kat is fine with one of them, then." I squeezed back, giving her a small smile. Hearing that made me feel better. Hopefully. Just maybe one of them will be someone we can both love. Remembering the history from my previous world, harems never truly worked, as the man who had the harem ended up either never giving enough to his current women or simply added more just for the sake of it. I didn't want to always have to watch my back, hoping the tea I was drinking wasn't poisoned simply because Jahi showed me affection. However, considering that shouldn't be too much of a problem since it seems Jahi's desires are much higher, and her body is much stronger, that a satisfaction of her women should always be fine. Though if she shows blatant favoritism. Sighing again, I looked towards the Marquis, asking, "When are they coming here? For how long?" She smiled at me, before saying, "They will be here in a week's time, and will be staying for a few days. More than likely, they will be here for a week. So, from now until they leave, all classes except for Baroness Estras are cancelled. You both will be learning etiquette and more to guarantee you don't make a fool of yourselves." I nodded at that, before looking over at the Countess, who said, "All right, Jahi, you are coming with us for today. We need to go get you more clothes. And no, Kat isn't coming with us. She needs to stay and talk with Julie about some things." At that, Jahi glared at the Countess before turning her gaze to me after I squeezed her hand. Embracing her, I walked over to my mother who had been quiet the entire time. Seeing me, she smiled, pulling me onto her lap. Ruffling my ears, I gave Jahi a smile, watching as she left the room with both the Marquis and Countess. Looking up at my mother, I asked, "What do we need to talk about?" Sighing, my mother closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "You see, the reason that I dislike Kyocera is simple. The Zara and Sarah Pax have always disliked each other. Yes, we aren't just some random people, Catherine. I used to be. Well, I was something like the princess of the Zara Pack. I was next in line to lead, to take over as chiefess. Ah. I should probably explain what a pack is, huh? At that I shook my head, a small smile on my lips. She was just like me, all over the place when she needs to explain something important. You see, a group of beastkin is called many things. Canine beastkin, like dogkin, wolfkin, and so on, are called packs. In particular, the Zara pack used to rule the northern tip of the Asmodia lands. We had an agreement with them that we would send soldiers and aid in time of need, as long as they allowed us to keep our lands and power. The Sarah pack ruled a land near us, a small swathe of land between March Asmodia and the Sultanate. As such, we used to have minor skirmishes with each other, but it wasn't uncommon for us to help each other in times of need. It was a love-hate relationship. Taking a breath, her gaze turned grim. Keo was the next in line to lead the Sarah pack, and since both of us were of the same age, well, we were often compared. We had similar strengths, so we were usually evenly matched. Our rivalry was heated, but we had a mutual respect for each other. Sighing, she looked down at me, a sad smile on her face. We went to the academy together, and somehow ended up as dorm mates. So, we started treating school like a competition. However, eventually, our rivalry took a turn. One night, someone slipped an aphrodisiac into Keo's food. Thankfully, it was slow acting, but that night she forced herself on me. We were both women, so nothing came of it, but as you can imagine, that event made things worse between us. After graduating, we went our separate ways. She ventured into the Sultanate, while I went home, becoming an adventurer. For a few years, I lived my life freely, adventuring with a small party. However, one day, I received news that my father was killed, and that a baron had kidnapped the women of the village. I went back to our village, only to find it in ruins. It wasn't just my father who was dead, most of the people in the village were dead. The reasoning was stupid. That baron wanted to marry me and force the pack to become his personal army. After all, beastkin are strong, and I had attended the academy. However, he had left mercenaries in the village. They chased me for months. With nowhere to go, no one I thought I could rely on, I made my way to the Sarah pack, hoping to seek asylum. However, Keo turned me away. Her own pack had suffered in recent times, so she didn't want to risk any more harm against her people. I understand that. I do. However, it was when I was at their village that I learned something. I was with child. At that, I gaped at her. My mother managed to escape the pursuit of multiple mercenaries. All while she was in the early stages of pregnancy. And I made it. Nothing happened to me during that. Poking my nose, she smiled at me. I learned that because I had started feeling nauseous all the time, as well as other physical signs. Even when I pleaded, telling Keo that I was pregnant, she still turned me away. However, she did point me towards something, and even to this day, albeit begrudgingly, I am thankful for her. She reminded me that, while I had been in the academy, 2 women had always shown interest in me. I had been friends with them in the academy, so maybe, just maybe, they would shelter me. After all, they were of much higher status than the baron. Smiling down at me, she continued to pet my head, before looking towards the wall, where the Marquis' portrait was hung. Her gaze turned gentle, and I could see the love in her smile. Cordiva and Rhea. Both of them, they accepted me, even when they knew I was pregnant. They took me in, even though Rhea had just given birth. I demanded that, if this were to work, that I sign a contract with them. To guarantee that I would always be safe, that you would always be safe. Sighing, she kissed my forehead before getting up. That's enough for today. Maybe I'll tell you more when you get older. Standing up, I hugged her leg. Looking up at her, I smiled, saying, "I love you, mother." Alright, another author's note. So, that's, kinda, July's story. Like she said, I will get into detail later about her life. The main point of this author note though is this. I want you all to give an unofficial review since we are at chapter 25. I plan on doing another at chapter 50. Put them into the comments and tell me what you think I do well, what I need to improve on, and so on. Again, just make them a comment if you do it. I would rather you save your actual review for later when the novel is further along. Agina, just let me know what you think I do well, where I can improve, what you like or dislike, if the story is easily understood, and so on. Considering my eventual goal with both this and A Kunoichi's Tale is to eventually start and be able to do this as a job instead of Amazon, I want to improve more as a writer, and that's where you all come in. So please, leave a comment telling me what you think. Thank you all a whole bunch, seriously. When I started this I did it as a whim, and treated it as such. Now, though, I see so many people actually being invested, both in this and in my fanfic. Obviously, I need to devote more time to writing, but seriously, you all make it so worth it. Enjoy. Chapter 27-26. New classes with Baroness Estra. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After my mother told me a little about her past, we set about preparing the guest rooms that the Empress and Sultana would occupy with their wives and daughters. Thankfully, both the rooms, albeit large, were much smaller than the room the Marquis and Jahi owned. Working together, I was reminded of my first few days in this new world, where I had first completed various small quests before getting a taste for what the future would be like. These large, a few hundred experience point quests. Currently, I was in charge of the bathroom of each room, the quest awarding 300 XP upon completion. My mother was scurrying about, cleaning the bedroom and lounge, making sure everything was up to par. Unlike her, I took my time, enjoying the peace and quiet, using it as a moment to think and contemplate the upcoming events. Little was truly known about the Empress. She rarely went out, and had extremely competent women as her wives. Lorelei Presa was one such woman. I remembered the passage Tu had seen in a book Jahi had been reading. She had changed the system of the academy, making it more accessible to the commoner population, as well as creating a branch of the academy dedicated to the education of the servants that the nobility tended to bring. These changes had been met with ridicule, with people like Baron Jilk demeaning Lorelei, calling her changes idiotic and a waste of money. However, Lorelei had made everyone regret her words as she had personally sponsored 3 students in the first year, each one graduating at not only the top of their classes but being awarded with apprenticeships to some of the foremost specialists in the empire. One of the sponsored students was a young man who excelled in medicine, researching the exact uses of various herbs and extracts. He revolutionized the medicine of the empire, making it more accessible and cheaper for the common people, extending the typical lifespan by almost a decade. The other 2 sponsorship students were talented in combat, becoming the squires for Helion Solari, a knight of Cinder. After these 3 students showed their worth, the stuck-up nobility tired to claim it was a fluke, a one-time affair. In a sense, they were right, as those 3 were geniuses. However, every year a small group of talented commoners attends the academy, placing in the top of their classes. This was just her performance politically. Thinking of that, as much as I dreaded having to share Jahi, I couldn't wait to meet her, as well as her daughter. Same went for the Sultana and Kyocera. Even after hearing the story my mother told, I couldn't find fault with the woman. After all, she never did anything wrong. Objectively speaking, she was in the right when she turned away my mother. She was under no obligation to risk her entire pack just for one person. Thinking of the Sultana's story, as well as hearing of Kyo's heritage, their daughter should be quite interesting. Again, I dreaded the idea of having to share Jahi, of seeing her divide her attention between us, but I was hopeful that these girls would have all the traits their parents did. Sighing, I looked around the bathroom, smiling slightly when I saw it was fully clean. Seeing the notification that the quest was complete, I moved to the next, telling the system to just add the total up at the end of the day. Time passed, and my mother and I had prepared the 2 guest rooms, making it so that a very brief cleaning would be needed a day before they arrived, instead of doing the work then. That night, Jahi clung to me, showing her affections much more openly than she had before. After a slightly stressful bath, we both lay in bed, Jahi's arms wrapped around me. Feeling her breath on my ears, I felt the familiar jolt rush down my spine. Burrowing deeper into her embrace, I enjoyed the warmth of her body. Feeling her hand stroking my back, I heard her whisper, "Are you sure, Kat? About letting someone else join us?" Hearing that, I moved back a bit, looking up at her eyes. Specks of gold shone through her amethyst eyes, and seeing her worried gaze I chuckled. "We shall see, won't we? Besides, the Marquis and Countess are right. If you don't take at least one of them as your wife, the amount of women you'd be forced to marry to tie you to the Empire would be innumerable." Looking at my eyes, she sighed, before a teasing grin spread on her face. "And what if I want dozens of women, Glaring at her, I turned over with a huff. Feeling her hold me tighter while she chuckled, I pouted. She continued to hold me, staying quiet as she buried her face into my neck. Daily XP 937.5, Level 10, 1323/3843. 2260.5/3843, smiling at that, I closed my eyes, falling asleep to Jahi's light breathing. Making our way towards the music hall, we entered, seeing Baroness Estrich dressed in something new. Wearing a low-cut top that exposed her midriff, with long, flowing sleeves covering her arms, as well as the long pants that stopped at her ankles, Baroness Estrich looked much like the belly dancers I had seen in the past. Looking at her with clear confusion, she chuckled when she saw our faces. "Yes, I know, this is much different than the conservative dresses I normally wear, right? Well, the Marquis requested I show you both the dances, clothing, and some of what you can expect from the Sultana and her wife." Looking over at Jahi, I could see her gaze roaming the Baroness' body. Squeezing her hand, she gave me a small smile before focusing on the Baroness' face. Gesturing for us to take a seat, the Baroness stood in front of us, before sighing. Still seeing the slight confusion in our gazes, she explained, "My husband is from the Sultanate, and I have always lived on the border. While I tend to prefer the dresses and dance of the Empire, I learned the dances and traditions of the Sultanate for him." Saying that, a light blush dusted her cheeks, before she coughed. "Alright, listen, the 2 main styles of dress over in the Sultanate are either this, which is loose, light fabric that exposes you to the beating sun, but allows the sweat to evaporate quicker and keep you cool. Conversely, some wear full robes and multiple layers, which wards off the heat. In the Sultanate, it comes down to personal preference, but most wear less, showing themselves off." Saying so, she twirled, giving us a full view of the outfit. Squeezing Jahi's hand again, I didn't even need to turn my head to know that she was ogling the Baroness. Looking back at us, the Baroness continued. "The type of dance from the Sultanate is much more upbeat and expressive than here. While the Empire's dances display elegance and formality, the Sultanate is more about expressing yourself. As such, the clothing grew to this, adding a pleasing view to the dance where the loose cloth flows behind the dancer. When the Sultana and her wife visit, the Marquis wishes to hold a banquet in the Sultanate style, and wishes to end the day with a small dance. Since the Sultanate is primarily women, it is the women courting their partners. As such, there isn't a dance for males, but rather the dances are used to attract someone. So, when the Sultana's daughter dances that night, it will be a courtship dance. Additionally, there is no one way to dance. Unlike the formal dances of the Empire, the dance changes from person to person, and event to event. There are 3 ways to react to the dance: rejection, acceptance, or abstaining. Anyways, I will show you the dance first, then the way for you to respond." Saying so, the Baroness moved towards Jahi, stopping a few feet from her. Taking a deep breath, the Baroness started swaying gently, lifting and lower her hips slowly, creating a rhythm for herself. Closing her eyes, she took another breath before starting to move around. Taking short, light steps, she continued swaying her hips, causing the cloth attached to her arms and legs to flow. Bringing her arms up, she started swaying them as well, moving the cloth around her arms and creating an enamoring scene. Picking up pace, she grabbed the cloth of her pants, raising it slightly, twirling. Continuing, she moved faster and faster, causing the cloth to ripple and form patterns as she danced. Time passed, and I was enamored. The dance movements themselves were simple, twirls, swaying, raising hips, and so on. It was very simple, but the pattern that the Baroness weaved together was complex and created a beautiful scene. Finishing, a light sheen of sweat covered her body, making her more alluring. Moving towards Jahi, she gave a shallow bow before extending her hand out. Acceptance is taking the hand and kissing the back of the hand. Rejection is ignoring the hand, or moving it away. Finally, abstaining is grabbing the hand with both of yours, giving it a squeeze. It shows interest, but also means you aren't sure yet. Turning towards me, she said, as you could see, the basic movements are easy, it's creating a flow that is difficult. Additionally, there are many ways to change the dance, as well as adding bells or charms to the cloth to add an auditory element. Nodding, I pursed my lips. Seeing how Jahi had a slight problem taking her eyes off the Baroness, I smiled, realizing I would have a perfect birthday gift for her in the far future. So, not entirely confident in the whole dance thing, unlike the waltz, it is much harder to actually describe this dance. Additionally, I tried finding a couple's dance, but wasn't impressed with the only one I could find, so I said, whatever, belly dance it is. Additionally, as many people are currently aware, it is hot as hell everywhere, and my AC seems to like barely working. So I am currently sweating and exhausted, so the chapter may be lacking slightly at the end. Hopefully the weather cools down soon. Chapter 28-27. Jahi's Actions, Kolia's book. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Baroness Estra's class could only last so long, which left time for Jahi and I to do whatever we wanted. I would clean our rooms, making sure everything was presentable, and Jahi would be on the training field, sparring with the Marquis when she was free. Of course, when I had free time or simply wanted to do something other than cleaning, I went to watch their spars, marveling at the quick pace and powerful blows launched at one another. Jahi slowly grew accustomed to her new strength, and would push her limits, hoping to create a solid foundation for her future. Like always, I wasn't slacking either, slowly improving my repertoire of spells, both water, wind, and some ice spells. I kept the ice book to myself, deciding to simply avoid having people question me on why I was creating spells for magic that I most likely wouldn't get. Scribbling down a new sequence, I looked up, seeing Jahi panting as she stood opposite the Marquis. Unlike before, the Marquis had a serious expression, her eyes tracking Jahi constantly. She was no longer completely nonchalant, as Jahi's improvement was quite astounding. Smiling slightly, I continued to watch their exchange, marveling at how quickly Jahi adapted from one set of moves to another, changing styles like it was a pair of clothes. They sparred for a few more minutes, until Jahi collapsed on the ground, panting heavily. Grabbing a few towels, I made my way over, handing one to the Marquis before wiping Jahi off myself. As she lay there, she smirked up at me. Ignoring her, I continued wiping her off. Her hand shot out, wrapping around my waist as she dragged me on top of herself, before rolling over, pinning me underneath her. Her smirk widened, and she leaned down closer to me, burying her head into my neck. Feeling her nuzzle into me, I blushed. Feeling her warm body paired with the musk of sweat made my mind go blank, and I kept opening my mouth to say something, only to close it again, not being able to form a thought. Pulling herself away slightly, she smirked down at me. For a brief moment I wanted to wrap my arms around her and pull her back down on top of me, already missing the warmth. Blushing deeper at the thought, as well as feeling my tail swish slightly, I continued to look up at Jahi, wondering what she was doing. Bringing her hand to the back of my head, she pressed our foreheads together, before saying, "Cat. You'll always be my first choice." Saying so, she moved her lips to my forehead, briefly kissing me before getting up. As she stood there, I could see her normally light blue skin had darkened slightly on her cheeks, as well as the fact that she wasn't directly looking at me, indicating her embarrassment. Laying there, my mind couldn't seem to catch up to the present, looping that small kiss dozens of times. Each time I could feel myself getting warmer inside. Hearing a loud laughter, I broke out of the loop, looking towards the noise. Seeing the Marquise holding her stomach as she doubled over, laughing like she had just seen the funniest thing, I paled. "Haha, oh lord, that's... Haha, really, Jahi. That was it. Saying so, I looked towards Jahi, who was fuming. Clenching her fists, she stomped towards the Marquise before flinging herself at her, throwing her fists towards the sides of the Marquise. Taking the hits, the Marquise continued laughing. Slowly rising from the floor, I stumbled over towards the door, attempting to escape. Sadly, the Countess walked in, and upon hearing the Marquise laughing like a lunatic, she quickly grabbed me, skipping over to the Marquise. So what happened? Slowly reining in her laughter, the Marquise grabbed Jahi by the arms, lifting her up. Jahi kept trying to kick the Marquise, her face a deep violet and glaring hard at her. "Well, it seems like our little demon is much like you, dear." Hearing that, the Countess started stroking my ears, and when I looked at her eyes I could see that they were a colder blue than normal. "What does that mean?" Seemingly oblivious to the Countess' rising tension, the Marquise pointed towards Jahi, saying, "Jahi here just gave the kid a little peck on the forehead." Then she started blushing hard. "Haha, just like you back in the day, when you thought that was the most intimate thing ever." Feeling the Countess' hand stop for a moment, before it sped up, I looked at the Marquise with some pity. "Haha, yes, I was quite naive, Hearing that, the Marquise froze slightly, before looking at the Countess from the side of her eyes. Jahi had stopped struggling, instead smirking at the Marquise. The Marquise finally realized she had brought up something she shouldn't have, as she quickly lowered Jahi before turning towards her wife, a wide, helpless smile on her lips. "That's what I loved about you, Rhea, I swear. Yes, you loved teasing me so much that you would go out of your way to prove to me that the things I viewed as intimate were not so intimate. Yes. I believe. Yes, I'm sorry, okay. Let's not dwell on the past, my love." Sending the Marquise a glare, the Countess huffed before smiling down at Jahi. Placing me next to her, the Countess crouched, saying, "Why don't you two run along now, I heard Kolia wants to discuss something." Grabbing my hand, Jahi shot a large grin at the Marquise before nodding to the Countess. Quickly making our way out of the training field, I looked back, only able to see the Marquise's wide eyes as the Countess cracked her knuckles. Considering the sickly sweet smell permeating the air, as well as the Countess' hair starting to rise, I sent a prayer up for the Marquise. Rushing down the halls, we could still hear the loud crash of thunder, as well as a low shout. Moving towards the library, Jahi stopped before the door. Looking away from me, she stood still, quiet. Tilting my head in confusion, I squeezed her hand slightly. Feeling that, I could hear her sigh before she turned towards me. Her cheeks were still slightly darker, but she had a glint of determination in her eyes as she looked at me. "Cat, will you always be with me?" Hearing her question, I furrowed my brows, confused. Nodding, I gently grabbed her other hand. Smiling slightly, she leaned towards me, her lips brushing against my forehead again. Taking a deep breath, she turned towards the door, entering the library. Following her, I was wondering what brought that on when I hear a light chuckle. Looking towards the long table in the center, I could see Archmage Kolia sitting in a chair, a small book in her hand. When she heard us walk in, she quickly closed the book and placed it off to the side. Giving us a confident smile, she gestured for us to sit. Taking a seat, I looked towards Archmage Kolia with anticipation, wondering what she wanted to discuss. Taking a deep breath, she looked between the two of us before saying, "So what do you think of tattoos?" Furrowing my brow, I looked at Jahi, seeing her frowning before she looked at me. Looking back at her, she sighed before placing a book between us. "Alright, should probably explain before just asking that, huh?" Well, I was browsing the library, more specifically the section dedicated to magic, when I came across something rather interesting. Before that, let me just tell you about magic tattoos. You see my arms. Saying so, she raised her left arm, tracing the runes before doing the same to her right, tracing the snake. My left arm has spells tattooed into it. Specifically, I have support spells on most of the arm, while the ritual circle on my wrist is an offensive spell. My right arm is a summoning spell, a contract. If I run the right amount of mana in the correct patterns, I can activate the spells tattooed on my skin. Now, unlike the pricking and injecting of dyes that most people do, a magic tattoo is the sequence being engraved onto your body via mana. Because of that, you are able to activate the spells, unlike if you were to have it inked onto your body. Anyways, I found a few interesting sequences and ritual circles, and I found one in particular. It allows two people to connect their cores together, allowing them to access the other's mana to use magic. Additionally, since it is possible to eventually convert one's mana into the elements you use. Well, that would mean Cat here could gain access to light magic, while Jahi gains access to whatever Cat awakens to. Huh, wouldn't it be funny if she had darkness magic? Chuckling at that, I asked, "So, why is such a useful ritual circle hiding in the library? What are the downsides?" Coughing slightly, Archmage Kolia pursed her lips. Well, if you move too far away from one another, you slowly lose access to your own mana. It takes a while. If I had to guess, in a year's time you would be locked from using your own mana, making you a person with a pseudo-core. All the benefits except for the magic. That's why no one uses it. Being tied to someone like that isn't something people would be willing to do. Pursing my lips, I looked between Archmage Kolia and Jahi. Seeing her also in a deep contemplation, I sighed. What is the max distance? Obviously we can't be tied at the hip, so how far is the range of the ritual circle? Tapping her fingers on the table, Archmage Kolia scrunched her brow, thinking. I believe it would be a few hundred feet. Obviously, the farther away the harder it is to do this, but I think you would be fine to be on other sides of the house and be fine. Jahi looked towards Archmage Kolia, saying, "This would have to wait till Cat awakens her core, wouldn't it?" Why mention it now? It's a very important decision, no? The more time you have to think it over, the better. Besides, I won't oversee or allow you to tie yourselves together if you haven't proven to me that you truly want it. Nodding, I looked at Jahi. She returned my gaze, smiling slightly. Thank you, Miss Kolia. We'll talk about this. Was that it? Nodding, Archmage Kolia stood up, bowing slightly. Giving us a smile, she walked towards another part of the library. Seeing that, I moved towards her side of the table, quickly opening the book she had hastily put away earlier. Feeling Jahi stand behind me, I flipped through the pages, skimming. Jahi slowly inched closer and closer, trying to get a better view of the book. Initially, I simply ignored this, but as the book's contents became obvious, I became overly conscious of Jahi's presence. Rushing back over to us, Archmage Kolia snatched the book from my hands, her face red. Chuckling, Jahi looked towards her, snaking her arms around me. Purring slightly, she said, "Ah, are you lonely, Miss Kolia?" Hissing at Jahi, Archmage Kolia blushed harder, storming out of the library. Leaning towards my ear, Jahi whispered, "Keep that book in mind, will you? That's what I want to do to you." Hearing that, I could feel my neck going crimson. Laughing loudly, Jahi led me out of the library, towards our room. Chapter 29-28. Talk with the Marquis. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. With Archmage Kolia's book in mind, as well as Jahi's previous actions, I felt trepidation as well as anticipation for what Jahi might do when we reached our room. I cursed slightly in my mind, hating the fact that I wasn't mature enough yet. Mentally, I was aroused, but considering my body was that of a child. We quickly reached our room, and as soon as we had entered our room, Jahi slammed the door, dragging me towards a couch. Throwing me down on the couch, I looked up at her in surprise. Seeing her hungry gaze, I shuddered. However, she saw that, and closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Opening her eyes again, she was calmer, and gently she pulled me up, snaking her arm around me. Leaning into her, I stayed quiet, taking in her warmth and smell. Moments passed in silence, just sitting there and enjoying each other's company. Cat. So, I did some research on Lorelei, and I found out that she is a vampire. However, no one truly knows what the Empress is, so. Leone could be pure vampire or she could be a hybrid, like how I have some elven characteristics, such as my long ears. I looked up at her, tilting my head slightly. Seeing my confusion, she stroked my ears. Leaning into her hand, she chuckled slightly, before continuing. Well, obviously I don't wish to marry either, but of the two, I would prefer Leone. Anput's mother has history with your mother, and who knows if she will have something against you as well. So. I gently placed my hand on Jahi's leg, making her stiffen slightly. Looking down at me, I smiled. Don't go into this with a bias due to the previous generation. Leone could be a horrible person even if her mother is amazing, just like Anput could be a kind person to both of us. Really, Jahi, please don't worry about me. As long as you can remember me, I'm fine. Hearing that, Jahi held me closer. Ruffling my ears, she whispered, I will always remember you, Cat. Forever and always. Smiling, I fell silent, enjoying her caress. We sat there for a while, before a knock could be heard at the door. Slowly rising, I moved to the door. Opening it, I saw a radiant countess and a charred marquis. Blinking a few times, I simply ignored it, opening the door wider and allowing them entry. The countess practically danced into the room, a wide grin on her face. Looking around, she lifted me up, saying, you are almost better than your mother when it comes to cleaning. Cat. Nodding weakly, I moved away from her slightly when she placed me back on the ground. Looking towards the marquis, she simply sighed before stumbling into the room. I flinched when she collapsed onto the couch, leaving some stains on the fabric. Pursing my lips, I sighed as I realized that I would have to clean the couch after she left. Looking towards Jahi, she was currently being praised by the countess, and she shot me a pleading look. Shrugging, I made my way to the couch, sitting next to the marquis. So. Not. A word. Nodding, I fell silent, watching as the countess scooped Jahi up and started rubbing their cheeks together. Watching the overly affectionate countess, I sighed. The marquis also sighed, before looking towards me. Hey, you mind if I rinse off quickly here? Nodding, I led her towards the bath, both Jahi and the countess too absorbed in their new conversation to notice us leaving. Throwing off her clothes, the marquis swayed into the bathroom, falling onto a stool. Shaking my head, I moved to behind her, quickly turning the shower on and positioning myself behind her. Placing my hands on her slumped shoulders, I started massaging her, earning a grunt as the marquis leaned back slightly. Continuing to knead her tense muscles, I asked, so. What exactly was Lady Presa like back in the academy? Sighing, the marquis stayed silent for a few moments before answering. Well, she was much different then. Back in the academy, she used to be a really shy, withdrawn girl. I used to sit next to her in my history and theory classes. I used to tease her, which I didn't realize I was doing in a flirtatious way. Anyways, she was pretty smart, only coming out of her shell when you started talking about her favorite topics. She would become really animated then. Oftentimes I would say something really stupid just to get a rise out of her. I slowly found myself drawn to her, both because of her good looks and her incredible acumen. After the academy though, I only saw her at the larger events, which is where I think she caught the Empress' eye. She had slowly but surely changed the small lands of her barony, improving both the profits and quality of life of her people. Seeing this, many tried to force her into marriage, wanting to use her to improve their own lands. I was incensed when I heard that, not only due to my previous attractions towards her, but also because I never want to see someone being forced into a marriage, especially if there is no love. Thankfully, the Empress had invited her to the palace one day, hoping to hear what this young baroness had done to drastically improve her lands. After that, the Empress suppressed anyone's attempts to force Lorelei into a marriage, and continued to invite her to the palace. Eventually, they fell in love, and their marriage was announced. Lorelei still manages her barony, but spends most of her time at the palace, with the Empress. Moving my hands to the Marquis' lower back, I asked, then, do you think her daughter will be the same? Shy, reserved, but passionate when you approach her to discuss her interests. I don't know, kid. If you asked me what I thought anyone else's child would turn out to be, I could give you a good idea. Like Baroness Estra. When she has a kid, more than likely they will take the elegance and good nature from her and take the incredible sociability from her husband. It's just how it works when two people with cores reproduce. The child is a true combination of the parents. However, the Empress. Even as two of her most trusted people, Rhea and I know very little about her. One moment she is like a raging inferno, the next she is like a small ember, calm and steady. No one truly understands her, at least everyone except her wives, and even then I have no idea if they understand her. She has lived a long time, my parents and grandparents spoke about her like she was ancient. So, little Leone could be shy, or she could be a brash, bold person. Or she could take after the Empress, being a constantly changing person. Sighing, I slowly finished my massage. Looking at the Marquis, I asked, does anywhere else hurt? Chuckling, she said, yeah, fucking everywhere. Shaking my head, I gestured towards the bath. Then soak. The warm water always helps my aches go away. Giving me a wry smile, she lumbered over to the bath, moaning lightly when she lowered herself into the water. Quickly washing myself, I joined her. Looking towards the door, I frowned slightly when I didn't see the Countess and Jahi barging in. They won't be joining us for a bit, if I had to guess. Jahi and Rhea won't notice the rest of the world when they are focused on something. If I had to guess, they are talking about you and me, swapping stories. Chuckling at that, I shuffled towards the deeper side, wanting to submerge most of myself. What was the academy like? Well, it's called Vulcan's Royal Academy, for one. Named so because the founder, Vulcan, was immensely disappointed with the lack of a place of learning. Anyways, he set up an academy in the royal city, with immense funding from the Empress, and it became a place of learning. Initially, even though it was called royal, it accepted anyone with talent. People tried paying their ways in only to be laughed at when they failed the entrance exam. It started as a true academy, the finest minds went there to learn anything. Support magic, offensive magic, blade work, forging, alchemy, you name it, there was a department dedicated to it. Over the years, it slowly turned into a shell of itself. Incompetent professors and idiotic students lowered its reputation, and people with talent who had no background were either blackmailed to join a faction, killed, or sent home if they were lucky. Thankfully, Lorelei is bringing it back to its glory days. Everyone is competent to some degree, and every year people need to pass an exam to stay. If you fail by a few points, you can get a professor or a large group of upperclassmen to vouch for you, but if you fail the test again, they need to pay remuneration to the academy. So, when you and Jahi attend, as long as you make sure Jahi is actually studying and keeping on top of her classwork. No playing hooky to enjoy one another, understood? Giving her a dry gaze, she chuckled before continuing. Jar will likely take classes for offensive magic and blade work. Whether she takes up the sword like Ria and I or takes to something else. Well, we shall see. You, on the other hand, will be spending your time as the only servant going with her. As such, you will be allowed to drop a class or two so you have time for your duties, but will still need to show some competency and improvement. Likely, your peers will be mediocre, though some crazy people like the Duchess up north have bred their servants together to make someone strong. Your classes are simpler, but if you wish you can request to take more advanced classes. Additionally, as a way to make money and offer a place to improve, the Academy hosts quarterly tournaments, as well as owning a large swath of land that they breed monsters on. Nothing insanely strong is there, but you still need to be careful. A few students die every year or two due to carelessness. Is everyone allowed to access the tournaments and this land? Yup. Servants and students can compete, but you need permission from a professor to access the lands. Grinning at that, I couldn't wait to go to the academy. The large amount of experience, from normal quests, hunting monsters, and most importantly, sex. By then, both Jahi and I will be mature enough to enjoy ourselves. Not only that, but I bet even a quickie gives a large amount of experience, especially with my Nymphomania max skill. I was looking forward to the future, wondering what heights Jahi and I will reach. I have 3 novel ideas flutter about in my head, and I wanted to say that I may simply write a few chapters to start for each, before leaving them be, only updating them when I have spare time. I will not be making them my main books. They are just things I want to get put down on paper, in a sense, and I might as well put them here, where people can see them. I will not be focusing them, hell, I might not even write all of them. I just wanted to let everyone know that I may do this, so I might take time on a free day and simply get them started. To give you all an idea on what I had in mind. 1. A Danmachi fanfic. This is mainly due to starting to read epic, and just like I said with the Naruto fanfics, it is a power fantasy. Nothing wrong with that, I quite enjoy power fantasies. I just really like Danmachi, my favorite anime, right next to Tensura, reincarnated as a slime, and Overlord. So, when I read epic, I thought about what I would write, which would be, surprise, a Futa OC who was in a small familia, doing what she could to get by. It would be more action-focused than Kunoichi's Tale, but still have character interactions. Anyways, I had a few ideas for that floating in my head, so yeah, eventually I will do that. It would be more about this OC soloing as much of the dungeon as she could, occasionally joining a party or expedition. 2. A story set in a cyberpunk-like world. I had a small desire recently to write about the gunfights, hacking, prosthetics, and so on. That would also be a double surprise, Futa OC, who would be a part of a gang, specifically the Iron Maidens, and would do all kinds of dirty work. The OC would start single, and was definitely mingling, but would eventually find herself the love interest for someone important. This would be a gunslinger, balls-to-the-wall action story. Heavily inspired by the lackluster cyberpunk game as well as Hive worlds from Warhammer 40k, I would take that corporate world and make it my own. The OC would go from doing a heist of a rival corporation before switching to a gun war. Lastly, we have this, the one I have been thinking about for a while. 3. The OC used to be in the best academy in her kingdom, with her amazing girlfriend, triple surprise, I think I have problem. However, after getting pregnant, OC's girlfriend leaves her, with no explanation. 14 years pass, and now the OC, after dropping out of the academy and doing what she could to successfully raise her son, is sending him to that same academy. Weeks pass, and eventually her old girlfriend comes back, one of the strongest people in the entire kingdom, maybe even the world. With alternating POVs, you would see the world in 2 differing ways, from someone who struggled to raise their child, making ends meet but happy to see her son succeed, and from someone who has lived her life before, and decided to change the world for the better, all for her family she had failed to protect in her first life. This would be a story about the two struggling to rekindle their spark. After all, they had been separated for almost a decade and a half. So, these are the things that I want to flesh out the beginning of, on paper, and will be doing so soon. Again, they will not be taking over my writing. If anything, they will be updated once a week or so, when I have either not enough ideas for Servant System or Kunoichi's Tale, or simply have a bunch of free time. Let me know if one idea stands above the rest, and I'll start with that one. I know, starting a third, fourth, and fifth book while I have two others. I did say in the beginning of this book that I have the attention span of a squirrel, so. Anyways, yeah, just letting this be a heads up. These are things that will not be heavily supported, just ideas I really want to get written down before I forget, because I have had a few that seemed awesome to me, but I can't really remember them anymore. Also, this made me realize that I definitely have a thing for Futa. Chapter 3029. Studying for the event. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As I was thinking about the future at the academy, the door slid open. Looking towards the door, I could see both the Countess and Jahi enter, slight smiles on their faces. Getting out of the bath, I walked over to Jahi, who had taken a seat in front of the shower. Washing her off, she looked over at me, asking, "What were you and Mom doing?" "Lady Presa and the academy." Hearing that, the Countess chuckled slightly, sending a shiver down my spine. Deciding to ignore that, I looked towards Jahi, who was smiling at me. "Oh. And why were you two talking about her?" Seeing her slightly cold gaze, I flinched slightly before sighing. I was asking the Marquis what she was like, hoping to figure out what Leon might be like. Hearing that, she pursed her lips, before sighing. Noel.n, so, what did you figure out? Not much. The Marquis says that Leon will be a mystery, since the Empress is one of her parents. Chuckling, the Countess looked over at us, saying, "That is indeed the case. Even when Cordiva and I worked by her side we couldn't get a read on the woman. Even when we met her other children, they were all very different." Getting up, the Countess made her way to the bath, sitting next to the Marquis, who flinched slightly when she felt the Countess lean into her. Rinsing Jahi off, I followed her into the bath. Pulling me into her, she wrapped her arm around me. Looking towards the Marquis, Jahi asked, "What are the plans for when the Empress and Sultana get here?" Leaning away from the Countess, the Marquis said, "The first day they are here is a day of rest. They could show up first thing in the morning or just after dusk. Either way, we will be waiting for them to show up, and after greeting them and showing them to their rooms, we will not have anything extravagant planned for that day. The second day will be spent outside, touring the gardens and simply discussing anything. We start in the around noon, and will first eat lunch outside. Then we tour the gardens, before having dinner outside as well. After that, we either remain outside to discuss things or retire inside. The third day will be an outing into the town, showing them what the March Asmodia has to offer. We leave around noon, and come back after dusk. Anything could happen when we tour the town, so we will be bringing a few banshees as guards. The fourth and fifth day will be dedicated to the cultures of the Empire and Sultanate respectively. We will do the things that the nobility of both sides tend to do, and end the days with a small dance. The sixth and seventh days are just days of relaxation, with nothing really planned. By that point, you both should have a decent understanding of our guests, and should be deepening your relationships with them." Sighing at the end of that, the Marquis leaned back, closing her eyes. However, when the Countess chuckled lightly and leaned into her, she stiffened again. Looking at Jahi, we exchanged glances before deciding to ignore them. Enjoying the heat of the water and the sloshing of the bath, we eventually decided to get out. Drying Jahi off, I helped her get dressed, before she did the same for me. Looking over to the married couple, I shrugged when I saw the Marquis' pleading gaze. Exiting the bath, I could hear a shout as the Marquise quickly flew from the bathroom, before throwing on her clothes and leaving our room. Looking at the door, I watched as the Countess exited the bath with a chilly gaze. Drying herself off, she calmly and methodically dressed herself, before giving Jahi and I a pat on the head. When she walked out of the room, both of us sighed in relief. Turning to Jahi, I said, "The Countess can be quite scary." Nodding, she smiled at me, saying, "Both of them can be quite scary, though I think Mother is much worse." Grabbing my hand, Jahi led me towards the library. Confused, I followed her, wondering why we were returning. Dragging me towards the section dedicated to the various races of the world, she started searching the shelves, before pulling out a book dedicated to vampires. Handing it to me, she continued to search the shelves, pulling out a book dedicated to canine beastmen as well as one about elves. Holding the 3 thick tomes, we made our way to a table. Placing the books on the table, Jahi opened the book about vampires. Leaning into her, I skimmed the book, reading keywords and determining which part of the page was worth reading. Seeing that they were similar to the vampires from my world, minus the whole burning in sunlight thing, I pursed my lips, wondering how Lorelei Presa and Leon Presa, Ash will act. Considering they still feed on mainly blood, though they are capable of eating normal foods, as well as the small aversion to bright things, it seems like Jahi and Leon will have some difficulty getting along, as Jahi absolutely hates bleeding and has light magic. Remembering the slight scratches she received when training with the Marquise, paired with her begging me to give her the sequence dedicated to healing oneself, I chuckled slightly. Closing the book, Jahi opened the next book, the one dedicated to canine beastmen. Flipping to the section dedicated to dogkin, we read through it, though I blushed slightly when it mentioned the various sensitive points that dogkin have, specifically the ears, tail, and how our stomachs are more sensitive than the rest of our skin. Seeing that, Jahi grinned, turning towards me. Her hands shot forwards, grabbing either side of my midriff. Gently tracing her fingers over my stomach, I doubled over to prevent her from attempting to tickle me, though this just made it easier for her to move her target to my ears, blowing lightly into my ears while also ruffling around them. I scowled at her, before giggling as she blew more into my ears. Eventually she stopped, though I could still see the mischievous light in her eyes. Glaring at her, she smirked at me, before turning back towards the book. Like I had expected and seen when I chose to be a dogkin, they have enhanced senses and reflexes, as well as strength. The book continued, saying dogkin are better warriors than mages, adding that this is due to the enhanced physical senses. Scoffing, I reaffirmed my conviction to learn stupidly powerful spells. Ruffling my ears, Jahi flipped through the book again, turning towards the jackalkin. The passage was similar to dogkin, the only difference being that jackalkin were faster and more agile, as well as having a better sense of smell. Seeing this, I contemplated what that would mean for Anput. Would she have the best of both worlds then? Or would she simply take after one of her parents, being either a dogkin or jackalkin? Shrugging, I looked towards the last book, curious as to why Jahi grabbed it. Looking at me, she gave a small smile, saying, "Although I am mainly demon, I am still part elf. I never really looked into what elves were like, so." Squeezing her hand, she smiled wider, before opening the book. While it was much smaller than the books for vampires and canine beastmen, it still had useful information. Elves had larger cores than the other races, allowing them to hold more mana. Additionally, because of this, they lived much longer as well. Due to their higher mana, they also innately had better control over it, and when they used a spell, it was always much stronger than other races. However, like most things, these amazing things came with some drawbacks. They had much lower reproductive ability, and a weak body, at least for people with cores. They relied on their magics to remain strong, and it wasn't odd to see them become reclusive, hoping to live their lives in peace, away from others in a hope to simply stay alive. Seeing that, Jahi scoffed, before looking towards me. Furrowing my brow, she looked away, muttering something. Sadly, I couldn't make it out, but when she turned back she had a wide smile on her face, so it must have been something about the book being wrong. Closing the books, we put them away before going to our room. Flopping into the bed, I lay there in Jahi's arms, clinging to her. Ignoring her roaming hands, I looked at the changes in my level, smiling a bit. These last 3 days have been quite fruitful. Level 10. 2260.5/3843. 5135.5/3843, Level 10. Level 11, 1292.5/5764.5, assigning my stat points, my stats now looked like STR 5, 10. 6, 12, Con. 7, 14, AGI. 6, 12, Dex. 7, 14, Cha, 8, 16, Wis. 7, 14, Int. 7, 14, smiling wider, I snuggled into Jahi, falling asleep to the rhythmic beat of her heart.